life," Judge Harold Whitaker said, as if he were reading the weather. 17-year-old Isaiah Grant stood at the defense table in a wrinkled white shirt, his wrists shaking above the cuffs of a borrowed suit jacket, his school scholarship pin still clipped to the inside pocket because his mother had told him to carry something that reminded him who he was. Behind him, Maya Grant covered her mouth with both hands. Public defender Rachel Moore froze with one legal folder open, the top page marked in red. Exculpatory camera request, not heard. The fluorescent lights of courtroom 6B buzzed overhead. The old wooden benches creaked as people leaned forward to watch a boy lose the rest of his life. No one moved. No one breathed loudly. The judge had just sentenced a black teenager to life in prison on evidence so thin it should have collapsed before trial. No fingerprints, no DNA, no weapon, no stolen jewelry found in his backpack. Only a shaky witness, a detective in a hurry, and a courtroom willing to believe Isaiah looked guilty before it bothered to prove he was. Isaiah did not scream. He did not curse. He did not throw himself at the table. He just turned to the deputy beside him and asked, voice cracking but calm, "Can I call my dad?" Judge Whitaker leaned back with a faint, tired smile. "Your father cannot save you from consequences, Mr. Grant." Isaiah looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm not sure about that, Your Honor." Within 7 minutes, the doors of that courtroom would open. Within 7 minutes, federal agents would step onto the aisle. And within 7 minutes, the same judge who had spoken the word life like procedure would stand silent as the United States Attorney General walked in and looked directly at the son the court had just tried to bury. But at 2:46 p.m., Judge Whitaker still believed he controlled the room. That was the mistake. The Baltimore City Criminal Courthouse sat under a gray November sky, its stone columns streaked from rain, its front steps crowded with lawyers, families, reporters, and people learning that justice often required waiting in lines beside vending machines. Courtroom 6B was on the 3rd floor, past a metal detector, 2 elevators that opened too slowly, and a hallway where old case calendars curled beneath plastic covers. On the door was a printed sheet. State of Maryland versus Isaiah Grant, case number 24-CR-1187, sentencing hearing. Judge Harold Whitaker presiding. Time, 2 p.m. The word sentencing looked ordinary. That was what made it terrifying. A word can look ordinary while carrying an entire life inside it. Isaiah stood beside Rachel Moore at the defense table, trying to keep his breathing steady. He was tall for 17, but in that room, he looked younger. His hair had been freshly cut by his uncle the night before. His tie was slightly crooked because his hands had trembled while knotting it. His mother had fixed it in the courthouse hallway and whispered, "Stand straight. They don't get to take that from you." So he stood straight. Even as the prosecutor described him like a headline. Dangerous, unaccountable, caught near the scene, a threat to public safety. Isaiah kept his eyes forward, not because he felt strong, because if he looked back at his mother, he might break. Maya Grant sat in the 2nd row, wearing a navy dress and a coat she had bought second-hand for court. Her eyes were red, but her back was rigid. Beside her sat Isaiah's little sister Naomi, 12 years old, clutching a folded college brochure from Howard University, because Isaiah had kept it taped above his desk for 2 years. Naomi did not understand all the legal words. She understood her brother was scared. That was enough. Rachel Moore rose again, her voice tight from being interrupted too many times. "Your Honor, before sentencing, the defense renews its motion to consider newly obtained footage from the Enoch Pratt Library entrance camera and the traffic camera at Saratoga and Pine. The timestamps directly contradict Detective Brenner's timeline. We also renew the request for an evidentiary hearing regarding witness pressure." Judge Whitaker struck the bench with his gavel. hard. The crack echoed through the room. "Enough, Ms. Moore." Rachel did not sit. "Your Honor, this is a 17-year-old child facing an adult life sentence. The court has not heard—" "The court has heard plenty." "With respect, it has not heard the evidence." The room stiffened. Judge Whitaker's face darkened. He was 68, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, and famous in Baltimore legal circles for what newspapers called stern courtroom discipline. Prosecutors praised him. Defense attorneys feared him. Families whispered about him in hallways after sentences that sounded less like judgment and more like disposal. Judge Whitaker believed he protected order. He did not see how often his order required silence from the people already losing. He looked down at Isaiah over the rim of his glasses. "Mr. Grant has had his trial. A jury has returned a verdict. This court will not indulge last-minute theatrics every time accountability becomes uncomfortable." Rachel's jaw tightened. "Evidence is not theatrics." "Sit down, Ms. Moore." She stayed standing 1 second longer. That second mattered. Then she sat, because contempt would not help Isaiah. Detective Carl Brenner sat behind the prosecutor's table with his arms crossed. He wore a dark suit, a police pin on his lapel, and an expression of annoyed patience. He had testified that Isaiah matched the description, fled the area, and gave inconsistent answers. He had not mentioned the full library camera log. He had not mentioned that the eyewitness first said, "I only saw the jacket." He had not mentioned the 3 hours he spent telling that witness to think carefully until uncertainty turned into identification. Brenner looked at Isaiah as if the case were already a closed drawer. Isaiah looked away. He knew hatred would not help him. But he also knew truth had been sitting outside the courtroom all day, knocking, while the judge refused to open the door. The prosecutor, Elaine Porter, stood with a folder in both hands. "The state asks this court to consider the gravity of the offense. A jewelry store owner was threatened with a firearm. The community deserves protection. The defendant was found within blocks of the scene wearing clothing consistent with the suspect description." Rachel rose halfway. "Black hoodie and jeans, Your Honor. That is not an identification." Judge Whitaker's eyes snapped toward her. "Ms. Moore." Rachel sat again, hands clenched under the table. Isaiah heard her whisper, "I'm sorry." He wanted to say it was not her fault, but the words would not come. The judge looked at the file, then at Isaiah. "Mr. Grant, you may make a final statement." The room changed. This was the cruel generosity of sentencing. A boy was offered a few words before the system decided what his future was worth. Isaiah stood slowly. His knees felt hollow. He looked at the judge, then at the seal on the wall, then at the American flag standing in the corner. He had pledged allegiance to that flag every morning in elementary school. He had written essays about justice. He had stayed late at the library shelving books because he wanted to become a lawyer and help people who could not afford one. Now the flag did not look false. It looked like a promise someone had forgotten to keep. Isaiah cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I know I'm not perfect. I've been late to class. I talked back to a teacher once. I got suspended in 9th grade for pushing a kid who kept messing with my sister." Maya closed her eyes. Isaiah continued, "But I didn't rob that store. I didn't have a gun. I didn't hurt anybody. I was walking home from the library. Ms. Hall at the front desk saw me leave. The camera saw me leave. My phone location shows where I was." Judge Whitaker stared down, expression flat. Isaiah's voice shook, but he did not stop. "I know what people see when they look at me sometimes. Hoodie, neighborhood, black kid near the wrong street at the wrong time. But that isn't evidence. That's just what people decide before they ask enough questions. A murmur moved across the benches. The judge lifted his gavel. Isaiah spoke faster. My dad always told me not to use his name to get respect. He said if I stood on the truth, I should stand straight. So I'm standing straight. And I'm telling this court I did not do this. For the first time, Judge Whitaker looked irritated enough to show it. Mr. Grant, he said, what this court finds troubling is how many young men in your position say they were simply walking home. The room went cold. Rachel stood. Objection, Your Honor, that statement is prejudicial. This is sentencing, counsel. It is still improper. Judge Whitaker leaned forward. What is improper is the refusal to accept responsibility while hiding behind a story designed to evoke sympathy. Isaiah stared at him. For a second, he was not in a courtroom. He was outside his school hearing a teacher say he looked suspicious near the faculty parking lot. He was in a store being followed aisle to aisle. He was at 13, being told by his father, some rooms will ask you to prove you are harmless before they believe you are human. His father, Daniel Grant. The man no one in that courtroom had connected to him because Daniel had worked hard to keep his public office away from his child's everyday life. Isaiah had used his mother's address for school, his mother's phone number for emergency contacts, and never once mentioned to classmates that his father was the United States Attorney General. Daniel had taught him that names should not be shields for truth. But truth, Isaiah was learning, could be ignored if it came from the wrong mouth. Judge Whitaker lifted the sentencing order. The paper made a soft scraping sound against the bench. Maya gripped Naomi's hand. Rachel whispered, "Please, Your Honor." The judge read, in consideration of the seriousness of the offense, the defendant's certification as an adult, the use of a firearm in the commission of a violent felony, and the need to protect the public. Isaiah's ears began to ring. The words stretched. Certification as an adult. Violent felony. Protect the public. He was 17. He still had a calculus worksheet in his backpack. He had promised Naomi he would help with her science project that weekend. The judge continued, This court hereby sentences Isaiah Malik Grant to life in the custody of the Maryland Department of Corrections. Maya cried out. Naomi started sobbing. Rachel froze. The prosecutor looked down. Detective Brenner exhaled through his nose as if a difficult errand had finally been completed. Then Judge Whitaker said it again, shorter, colder, final. Life. One word. The whole room heard it hit. Isaiah did not fall. That surprised people later. He did not collapse into the chair. He did not shout that the court was wrong. He did not beg. He only stared at the judge, and something inside him became very still. Not empty. Still. The kind of stillness that happens when fear burns down and leaves only the thing your father told you to carry. Dignity. The deputy stepped closer with handcuffs ready. Rachel turned quickly. Isaiah, don't say anything else. But Isaiah looked at the deputy. Can I make a phone call? The deputy hesitated. Judge Whitaker gave a humorless smile. A phone call? Isaiah nodded. To my father. The judge leaned back. Mr. Grant, this court is not moved by emotional gestures after sentencing. It won't take long. Your father cannot undo lawful consequences. Isaiah met his eyes. I'm not sure they were lawful. A sound moved through the courtroom, sharp, dangerous. Rachel whispered, Isaiah. Judge Whitaker's face tightened. The prosecutor looked alarmed. Detective Brenner sat forward. For 1 second, it seemed the judge might order Isaiah removed immediately. But perhaps he wanted to show control. Perhaps he wanted the room to see mercy where there had been none.
Perhaps he believed a frightened boy calling a powerless father would only underline the finality of what had just happened. He waved one hand. "One call, briefly." The deputy handed Isaiah a phone. Isaiah's fingers shook as he dialed a number he knew by heart, but almost never used during work hours. Washington, D.C., department line rerouted through secure staff.
1 ring, 2. Then his father's voice. "Isaiah?" The sound almost broke him, almost. He turned slightly away from the room. "Dad?" A pause. Daniel Grant heard everything in that one word. "What happened?" Isaiah swallowed. "They did it." His mother covered her face. Isaiah closed his eyes. "They gave me life." At the other end of the line, there was silence. Not confusion, not panic. A silence so controlled it frightened him more than shouting would have. Then Daniel asked, "Are you standing?" Isaiah looked down at his shoes. "Yes, sir." "Are you telling the truth?" "Yes, sir." "Did you let them make you bow?" Isaiah's throat tightened. "No." Daniel's voice changed, not louder, deeper. "Then stay standing." Isaiah opened his eyes. "Dad." "Listen to me. Do not argue, do not resist, do not give them anything to use. Look at your mother. Breathe. I am already in the building." Isaiah went still. Already. The word moved through him like electricity.
"What?"
"I am already in the building," Daniel repeated. "Rachel has preserved the record. The federal team has the camera logs. The witness audio is authenticated. We were waiting for the court to rule on the motion." Isaiah's eyes lifted toward Judge Whitaker. The judge was watching impatiently. Daniel continued. "They ruled." Isaiah whispered, "Yes." "Then now they answer." The line clicked dead. Isaiah lowered the phone. Judge Whitaker tapped his fingers on the bench. "Are we finished with the family drama, Mr. Grant?" Isaiah looked at him. The fear was still there. The pain was still there. But beneath it was something new. "No, Your Honor," Isaiah said quietly. "I think it's just starting." Before the judge could respond, footsteps sounded outside courtroom 6B. Not hurried, measured, heavy. The kind of footsteps that make officers turn before doors open. The gallery shifted. Detective Brenner looked toward the entrance. Rachel Moore stood slowly. Maya Grant lifted her head, tears still wet on her face. The double doors opened. 2 federal agents entered first, dark suits, gold badges, eyes forward. Behind them came a tall black man in a charcoal suit and a dark blue tie, his face calm, his jaw set, his right hand carrying a sealed evidence folder marked U.S. Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, Urgent Review, State versus Grant, File DOJ-CRD-24-771. The courtroom clerk saw him and whispered, barely breathing, "That's Daniel Grant." Someone in the back said, "The Attorney General." Judge Whitaker's expression changed. Not much, but enough. Daniel Grant stepped into the aisle and looked first at his son, not the judge, not the prosecutor, not the cameras. His son. Isaiah stood exactly as he had been told, straight. Then Daniel turned toward the bench, and for the first time that day, Judge Harold Whitaker did not reach for his gavel.
Part 2. The Quiet Endurance. 3 months before Judge Whitaker said life, Isaiah Grant was sitting at the back table of the Enoch Pratt Free Library, helping a 10-year-old boy sound out the word Constitution. The boy's name was Marcus. He had a pencil tucked behind one ear, a math worksheet covered in eraser marks, and the kind of frustration that made children decide they were stupid before anyone taught them that learning could be slow without being shameful. Isaiah leaned over the page. "Break it down," he said. Constitution. Marcus frowned. "That's too many pieces." "Most big things are." Marcus looked at him. Isaiah smiled. "Even the important ones." It was 6:12 p.m. on a Tuesday in late August. Outside, Baltimore heat still clung to the sidewalk. Inside, the library smelled like dust, paper, printer ink, and old air conditioning. Isaiah's backpack was under the chair beside him, holding a calculus book, a worn copy of The Autobiography of Malcolm X, and the Howard University brochure Naomi kept stealing from his desk. He worked at the library 3 evenings a week. Not because the pay was good, it was not. He worked there because Ms. Hall, the head librarian, had let him sit in the reading room when he was 13 and needed somewhere quiet after school. She had seen him reading court opinions on the public computer one afternoon and asked, "You understand any of that?" Isaiah had answered, "Not yet." Ms. Hall had laughed. Good answer. 4 years later, he was the student assistant other kids came to when they needed homework help, printer cards, or someone patient enough to explain why a comma could change a sentence. He wanted to become a lawyer, not the kind on television, the kind people called when nobody believed them. His father had once asked him why. Isaiah had been 15 then, standing in the kitchen at 11:40 p.m. while Daniel Grant loosened his tie after returning from Washington. The whole house smelled like reheated chicken and his mother's lavender soap. Daniel looked exhausted, but he listened like listening was a form of respect. Isaiah had said, "Because sometimes the truth is in the room, but it doesn't know how to speak the language." Daniel had stared at him for a long moment. Then he said, "That is the first honest definition of law I have heard in years." Daniel Grant was not an ordinary father. Most people in Baltimore did not know that. At school, Isaiah was Isaiah Grant, honor roll student, debate club captain, scholarship candidate, older brother, part-time library assistant. He was not the Attorney General's son. Daniel and Maya had agreed long ago that Isaiah and Naomi deserved childhoods that were not constantly distorted by cameras, security, political enemies, or people pretending friendship because their father had power. So Isaiah lived mostly with Maya in Baltimore, while Daniel's work kept him in Washington during the week. Daniel came home when he could. He called every night when he could not. He never let Isaiah confuse privacy with absence. On Isaiah's desk was a small brass compass Daniel had given him when he turned 16. It did not work perfectly anymore. The needle trembled. The glass was scratched. It had belonged to Daniel's father, a civil rights attorney who spent 40 years defending people no newspaper cared to name. Daniel had placed it in Isaiah's palm and said, "This is not to tell you where north is. It is to remind you to keep one even when the room spins." Isaiah carried that lesson more than the compass, but the compass stayed in his backpack anyway. A small thing, a quiet thing, the kind of thing you touch when the world tries to rename you. On September 14th, the world tried. That evening, Isaiah clocked out of the library at 8:07 p.m. The checkout log showed his initials. Ms. Hall waved from the circulation desk and told him to take the side exit because rain had started near Cathedral Street. "Text your mother when you get home," she said. "I always do." "You say that like boys don't lie." Isaiah smiled. "I'm a future attorney. I phrase carefully." She threw a pencil at him. He laughed, pushed through the side door, and stepped into the wet alley behind the library. The city smelled like rain on concrete and fried food from the corner shop. He pulled his black hoodie over his head, not because he wanted to hide, but because the rain was cold. His phone battery was at 12%. Naomi had texted him a picture of her science project with the message, "Do not laugh. It looks like a volcano sneezed." He typed back, "It has character." At 8:11 p.m., 6 blocks away, a small jewelry store called Bell & Hart was robbed by a masked man carrying a handgun. At 8:13 p.m., the store alarm hit the district dispatch system. At 8:16 p.m., the suspect ran east through the Pine Street alley, away from the library. At 8:18 p.m., Isaiah turned onto Saratoga with his backpack over one shoulder and rainwater dripping from his hood. At 8:19 p.m., Detective Carl Brenner saw a black teenager in a dark hoodie within blocks of a robbery and decided the story had found its ending. "Stop right there." Isaiah stopped. Two patrol officers approached with hands near their belts. Isaiah lifted both hands immediately. "I didn't do anything." Detective Brenner stepped into the streetlight. He was 46, heavy-set, with a close-trimmed beard and the tired confidence of a man who had closed many cases fast enough that nobody asked how carefully.
"Where are you coming from?" "The library." "At 8:20 at night?" "I work there." Brenner glanced at the backpack. "You got proof?"
"My employee card is in my bag. My boss can tell you. There are cameras." The detective's mouth tightened. There are always cameras when it's convenient. Isaiah felt something cold move through his chest. Not fear yet, recognition. He knew this tone. He had heard it in school offices, stores, bus stops, and security lines. The tone of a person who asked questions only to decorate an answer already chosen. "I can call Ms. Hall," Isaiah said. Brenner stepped closer. "You can answer me first." "I am answering you." One officer stiffened. Brenner's eyes narrowed. "Careful." That word turned the whole sidewalk into a trap. Careful meant do not sound angry. Careful meant do not sound scared. Careful meant your innocence can be misread as attitude if we need it to be. So Isaiah swallowed the panic. He remembered Daniel's voice. "When the room spins, keep north."
"I'm not resisting," Isaiah said. "I'm telling you I was at work."
Brenner looked him up and down. Black hoodie, dark jeans, same general build, near the scene. Convenient library story. Isaiah's hands trembled. "That isn't evidence." Brenner smiled without warmth. "Kids like you watch too much courtroom television." At 8:31 p.m., Isaiah was placed in the back of a patrol car. At 9:04 p.m., Maya Grant arrived at the district station with rain in her hair and terror in her face. She pushed through the front doors holding her phone, Isaiah's birth certificate, his school ID, and a printout of his library work schedule, because mothers know that proof must be carried when people have already decided not to believe love. "My son is 17, she told the desk sergeant. "He called me from a patrol car. I need to see him." The sergeant looked tired. "Ma'am, have a seat." "I need to see him now." "Ma'am?" That one word carried the threat of being labeled difficult. Maya heard it.
She had heard it before. She lowered her voice, but not her spine. "My son has a right to counsel. He has a right to contact a parent. He has a right not to be questioned without representation." The sergeant looked up then. Most mothers arrived crying. Maya arrived quoting rights. That made him slower, but not kinder. In an interview room, Brenner sat across from Isaiah with a paper cup of water between them. "You're making this harder," he said. "I want my mom." "She's outside." "I want a lawyer." Brenner leaned back. "You know, innocent people usually want to clear things up." Isaiah stared at him. "My dad says innocent people need lawyers because guilty systems ask clever questions." Brenner's eyes sharpened. "Your dad a lawyer?" Isaiah looked down. "Yes." "What kind?" Isaiah did not answer. That was the moment he could have said it. United States Attorney General. A title big enough to change the temperature in the building. But Daniel had taught him not to use the name as a weapon. And Isaiah still believed, even then, that truth should not need a famous father to be heard. So he said only, "I want counsel." Brenner ended the interview 5 minutes later and wrote in his notes, "Subject evasive, refused to provide full explanation." That was how silence became suspicion. By midnight, an elderly witness named Mrs. Alma Patterson had given her first statement. "I saw someone run past the alley," she said. "Dark clothes, maybe young. I didn't see his face." At 2:17 a.m., after Detective Brenner showed her a still photo of Isaiah from the arrest scene and told her, "Take your time, people forget details when they're scared," she changed it. It could be him. At 3:05 a.m., the phrase "could be" became "identified the suspect" in Brenner's report. By morning, Isaiah Grant was no longer a boy walking home from work. He was the accused. The first time Daniel Grant returned to Baltimore after the arrest, he did not arrive with cameras or federal vehicles. He came through the back entrance of the house at 5:40 a.m., tie loosened, face gray from no sleep, carrying a legal pad and the terrible restraint of a man powerful enough to make noise, but wise enough to know noise could poison the truth. Maya met him in the kitchen. For 1 second, neither spoke. Then she hit his chest with both hands and collapsed against him. "They took our baby," she whispered. Daniel held her. His face did not break. Not yet. If it broke, hers would have to hold both of them. "What did they ask him?" he said. "He asked for a lawyer. He didn't tell them who you are." Daniel closed his eyes. Pride and pain crossed his face at the same time. "That boy. He was trying to do what you taught him." "I know." Maya stepped back. "Then teach him something else now. Teach him that sometimes your name can save his life." Daniel looked toward the hallway, where Isaiah's room door stood half open. The Howard brochure was still taped above the desk. The brass compass sat beside a stack of vocabulary flashcards. "I want to walk into that station and tear the case apart," he said quietly. "Then do it." "If I do it too soon, they will say the Attorney General interfered to protect his son." "I don't care what they say." "I do," Daniel said, and his voice finally cracked. "Because if we use power before proof, they will make Isaiah's innocence look like privilege." Maya stared at him. "Our son is in a cell." "I know." "Then don't talk to me like a public official." Daniel's eyes reddened. "I am talking to you like a father who knows they will use my title against him if I give them the chance." That was the cruelty of power in a biased system. Use it too soon, and truth becomes favoritism. Use it too late, and the innocent suffer while procedure performs itself. So Daniel made the hardest decision of his life. He would not command the local court. He would not call the judge. He would not threaten the prosecutor. He would build a record so clean that no one could say Isaiah escaped because of his father. The truth would stand on evidence. But Daniel would make sure the evidence was found. By 8:30 a.m., an independent defense investigator had contacted Ms. Hall at the library. By 10 o'clock, Rachel Moore had been assigned as public defender and found a voicemail from an unknown federal legal liaison requesting that all preservation letters be sent immediately. By noon, subpoenas were drafted for the library camera, the traffic camera at Saratoga and Pine, the store alarm records, and Isaiah's phone location data. By sunset, Daniel had opened a private file with 3 words written across the top. "Do not interfere. Document everything." For weeks, Isaiah endured the slow violence of being treated like a conclusion. At school, some teachers avoided his name. A classmate posted a news clip with the caption, "You never really know people." One neighbor crossed the street when Maya walked to the store. Naomi came home crying because someone asked if her brother had a gun. Isaiah sat in juvenile holding, then county detention after certification proceedings began, reading the same page of his history textbook again and again because none of the words could fight the word people had placed on him. Robber, dangerous, defendant. He wrote letters to Naomi. He wrote one to his mother and tore it up because everything sounded like goodbye. He did not write to Daniel, not at first, because a part of him was angry. Not because Daniel did nothing, because Daniel was doing everything carefully. And prison did not feel careful. Prison felt immediate. Rachel Moore fought. She was young for a public defender, 34, with tired eyes and a voice that grew sharper whenever prosecutors underestimated her. She had 73 open cases and still stayed late to read Isaiah's discovery files line by line. She found the gaps, The missing camera, the changing witness statement, the wrong timeline, the absence of physical evidence. At a pretrial hearing, she stood before Judge Whitaker and said, "Your Honor, the state's case depends almost entirely on proximity and a witness whose statement changed after extended police contact. We request suppression review and access to the full interview recording." Judge Whitaker barely looked up. Denied. The witness identification can be addressed at trial. At trial, the jury will hear a version already shaped by police pressure. Ms. Moore, do not editorialize. It is not editorializing to defend a child from a bad record. The judge's eyes hardened. "Counsel, your client is being tried as an adult." Rachel turned slightly toward Isaiah. He was sitting beside her in a gray detention uniform too large for his shoulders. "Only when punishment is convenient," she said. The judge struck the bench. "Careful, Ms. Moore." There was that word again. Careful. A word used whenever someone came too close to the truth. The trial itself moved faster than truth could breathe. The prosecutor built a story out of shadows. Dark hoodie, near scene, nervous behavior, witness identification, refusal to explain. Rachel built a defense out of facts. No fingerprints, no DNA, no weapon, no jewelry, no money. Library work log. Phone data pending. Camera request denied. Witness uncertainty. But facts delayed are often treated like excuses. The jury saw Isaiah through the frame the state built first. And Judge Whitaker allowed that frame to stay. When Rachel objected to language about young men from neighborhoods like his, the judge told the jury to rely on evidence, then let the prosecutor continue. When Rachel asked for a continuance to obtain the traffic footage, the judge said the request was untimely. When Rachel asked Detective Brenner why the first witness statement said, "did not see face," Brenner said trauma affects memory. The jury believed enough. Not all. Enough. Guilty. Isaiah heard the word and felt his mother's sob behind him. He did not look back. If he looked back, he would fall. That night, alone in a holding cell after the verdict, Isaiah finally cried. Not the loud way people imagine. Quietly, almost politely, as if even grief might be punished for disturbing order. He sat on the metal bench, the brass compass hidden inside his property envelope somewhere beyond reach, and whispered the sentence his father had taught him. Keep north. But for the first time in his life, he did not know where north was. 2 days before sentencing, Rachel received an encrypted email. Subject: Preserved materials. Grant timeline review. Attached were preliminary confirmations from the library, traffic camera recovery, and cell tower analysis. Not yet admitted. Not yet enough to stop the sentencing unless the judge agreed to hear it. Rachel printed the packet, stamped each page, filed the emergency motion. Then she called Daniel Grant. "They may still refuse to hear it," she said. Daniel was silent for a long moment. "Then we let the refusal become part of the record." Rachel closed her eyes. "He is 17. "I know. You are asking him to survive the system long enough to expose it." Daniel's voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. "No, the system is asking that. I am trying to make sure it does not kill him before the truth arrives." On sentencing day, Isaiah wore the borrowed suit. Maya fixed his tie in the hallway. Naomi slipped the Howard brochure into his hand. Rachel carried the emergency motion. Daniel waited inside the courthouse, 2 floors below courtroom 6B, with federal agents, authenticated evidence, and a father's rage folded behind official restraint. Isaiah did not know he was already there, not until the call, not until life, not until Daniel said, "I am already in the building." And now, as Daniel Grant stood in the aisle of courtroom 6B with the Department of Justice folder in his hand, every person in that room had to confront what they had ignored. Isaiah Grant had not been alone. But the terrifying question was already forming in the silence. What would have happened if he had been? Part 3. The pressure escalates. Daniel Grant did not storm into courtroom 6B. He did not shout. He did not point. He did not use the kind of anger people expected from a father who had just heard his son sentenced to life. That made his entrance more frightening. He walked down the center aisle with 2 federal agents behind him, one Department of Justice attorney at his right and a sealed evidence folder in his hand. Every step sounded clear against the old wooden floor. Isaiah watched him come closer. For one dangerous second, he was not 17 in a courtroom. He was 6 years old, waiting outside a school office after another boy broke his pencil box, and the teacher asked why Isaiah had looked so angry about it. Daniel had arrived then too, calm, quiet, carrying a briefcase and the kind of patience that made adults explain themselves more carefully. But this was not a school office. This was the room where a judge had just taken his future. Daniel stopped beside the defense table. He looked at Isaiah's wrists, at the deputy holding the cuffs, then at his son's face. "Are you all right?" Isaiah almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because nothing about the question fit the moment. "No, sir," he whispered. Daniel nodded. "Good. Tell the truth, even when it hurts." Only then did he turn to the bench. Judge Whitaker sat frozen with one hand near the gavel. His face had changed from irritation to something colder and more careful. He recognized Daniel Grant. Every lawyer in America recognized Daniel Grant. The man had argued before appellate courts, led federal civil rights prosecutions, and become United States Attorney General after a career built on cases where local power had tried to bury inconvenient people. But recognition was not the same as surrender. "Mr. Attorney General," Judge Whitaker said stiffly, "this is a state criminal proceeding. You cannot simply enter my courtroom and interrupt a lawful sentence." Daniel's voice was even. "I am aware of the jurisdiction, Your Honor." "Then you are aware you have no authority to convert this courtroom into a federal spectacle because the defendant happens to be your son." A sound moved through the gallery. Your son. There it was. The secret no longer hidden. Faces turned. The prosecutor, Elaine Porter, went pale. Detective Brenner's arms slowly uncrossed. Rachel Moore closed her eyes for half a second, not in relief, but in exhaustion. She had spent months telling the truth as a public defender and had been treated like noise. Now the same truth had entered wearing federal authority, and suddenly the whole room remembered how to listen. Daniel did not look embarrassed by the accusation. He had expected it. "I am not here to ask this court for special treatment for my son," he said. "I am here because the Department of Justice has received credible evidence of withheld exculpatory material, witness coercion, and possible civil rights violations in this case." Judge Whitaker leaned forward. "Convenient timing." Daniel's eyes did not move. "No, Your Honor, documented timing." He placed the folder on Rachel Moore's table, not the prosecutor's. That mattered. The public defender who had been interrupted all afternoon was the first person in the room given the evidence. Rachel looked at the label. DOJ-CRD-24-771, State v. Grant Preservation and Emergency Review Materials. Her hand shook when she opened it. Inside were printed logs, affidavits, authenticated stills, transcript excerpts, and a flash drive in a clear evidence sleeve. A yellow cover sheet listed times. Library exit camera, 8:07:42 p.m. Store alarm activation, 8:13:09 p.m. Suspect seen eastbound Pine Street traffic camera, 8:16:31 p.m. Isaiah Grant phone geolocation near Saratoga bus shelter, 8:18:54 p.m. Witness interview discrepancy. Original statement 9:42 p.m. Revised statement 2:17 a.m. Detective Brenner audio file. Recovered from interview room backup server. Rachel's lips parted. She had suspected the shape of the truth. Now she was holding its skeleton. Elaine Porter stood quickly. "Your Honor, the state objects to this entire performance. The Attorney General's personal connection to the defendant creates an obvious conflict." Daniel turned to her. You knew about the traffic camera request. Porter stiffened. I knew the defense was fishing for evidence after trial deadlines. Daniel removed one document from the file. On October 3rd, your office received notice from Baltimore Police Evidence Unit that additional traffic footage had been preserved under item BPD-VID-4431. On October 5th, Detective Brenner wrote in an email to you, "Not useful to our theory. Defense will try to twist timestamp." The courtroom went still. Porter's face drained. Judge Whitaker's eyes moved to her. "Ms. Porter?" She said nothing. Daniel continued, still calm. On October 6th, Ms. Moore filed a motion requesting that footage. The state opposed it as speculative. Your Honor denied the motion without review. Judge Whitaker's jaw tightened. I ruled based on what was presented. Rachel stood now, folder in hand. No, Your Honor, I presented the issue repeatedly. The court refused to hear it. Ms. Moore? No. Rachel's voice cracked, but she did not sit. No, Your Honor. You cut me off during trial. You cut me off this afternoon. You called evidence theatrics. You sentenced a child to life while an emergency motion was still pending in your clerk's inbox. Everything froze. The clerk looked down. That was the first crack from inside the room. Judge Whitaker turned toward the clerk. What motion? The clerk's hands trembled over the keyboard. Your Honor, there is a time-stamped electronic filing from Ms. Moore at 11:38 a.m. today. Subject line, emergency motion to reopen record prior to sentencing, newly preserved video and witness evidence. Rachel closed her eyes. Maya Grant let out a broken breath. Isaiah stared at the clerk. The motion had been there, not imaginary, not desperate, there. Judge Whitaker's face reddened. Why was I not notified? The clerk looked terrified. It was routed the chamber's review queue. I flagged it at 12:04. For the first time, Judge Whitaker looked toward his own chamber's door. A silent bystander had become a witness. Daniel spoke again. Your Honor, before any transfer order is executed, Ms. Moore is entitled to renew her motion. The Department of Justice is also issuing a preservation notice for all records in this case, including chambers communications, prosecutor communications, police interview recordings, and discovery logs. Elaine Porter's voice was strained. You cannot seize state files in open court. Martin Hale, the DOJ attorney beside Daniel, stepped forward. We are not seizing. We are preserving. Destruction or alteration after notice may create separate exposure. Detective Brenner stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. Every head turned toward him. He should have stayed seated. Daniel looked at him. Detective Carl Brenner. Brenner's face tightened.
You people come in here after the fact with federal badges and act like you know what happened on the street.
Daniel's voice remained quiet. I know what your report says. My report is solid. I know what the first witness statement says. Brenner stopped. Daniel continued. I know Mrs. Alma Patterson said she did not see the suspect's face. She clarified later. After 3 hours. She remembered. Daniel opened another page. She said, I don't want to put the wrong child away. You replied, Ma'am, if he walks, the next victim is on your conscience. Brenner's eyes widened. The words had found him. Not rumor, not accusation. His own voice, waiting in a file he thought nobody would ever play. The gallery went silent. Judge Whitaker stared at Brenner. Detective? Brenner looked at Porter. Porter did not look back. That was how systems abandoned people when the record turned. Rachel Moore picked up the flash drive. Your Honor, the defense moves for an immediate stay of commitment, reopening of the sentencing record, and an evidentiary hearing on Brady violations, witness coercion, and actual innocence evidence. Judge Whitaker's hand moved toward the gavel. Daniel looked at him. Before you rule, Your Honor, I ask you to remember that this courtroom is now under federal preservation notice. It was not a threat. It was worse, a fact. Judge Whitaker's hand stopped.
For months, he had treated Rachel's objections like interruptions. He had treated Isaiah's innocence like a script. He had treated Maya's tears like background noise. Now every word was becoming reviewable. Every denial, every interruption, every refusal. The judge looked at Isaiah. For the first time all day, he truly looked at him. Not at the hoodie from the arrest photo, not at the neighborhood, not at the prosecutor's story. At the boy. 17, still standing. Isaiah did not smile. He did not want victory.
He wanted the last 3 months back. He wanted the word life pulled out of his mother's chest. He wanted to go home and help Naomi with her science project and return the library book that was probably overdue. He wanted to stop being evidence that people only listened when power entered behind the truth. Judge Whitaker cleared his throat. This court will take a brief recess to review. No, Rachel said. The word shocked everyone, including herself, but she kept going. With respect, Your Honor, the defense objects to recess before the court states on the record whether the defendant will remain in custody under a life sentence, despite newly authenticated evidence that directly undermines the conviction. Judge Whitaker glared. Rachel's hands shook. Still, she stood. She had been careful for months. Careful had nearly buried a child. Daniel looked at her with quiet approval.
Maya saw it and began to cry again, not from despair this time, but from the unbearable relief of seeing one adult finally refuse to sit down. The judge's face hardened. "Play the file." No one moved. Then Daniel nodded to Martin Hale. The DOJ attorney connected the evidence drive to the courtroom display system. The screen flickered. A file appeared. BP_interview_room_2_backup_audio Patterson_Alma_0914_2217.wave. Detective Brenner's face changed. "Your Honor, I object." Judge Whitaker cut him off. "Sit down, Detective." Brenner sat. For once, he obeyed. Martin clicked play. Static filled courtroom 6B. Then the voice of an elderly woman trembled through the speakers. "I told you, I saw a dark jacket. I didn't see his face." Brenner's recorded voice answered. "Mrs. Patterson, look at the photo again. People like this count on witnesses being unsure." Maya covered Naomi's ears too late. Rachel gripped the table. Isaiah closed his eyes. On the recording, Mrs. Patterson whispered, "He looks young." Brenner said, "Young doesn't mean harmless." The courtroom went silent around the sound. Then came the line that broke the case open. "I don't want to put the wrong child away," Mrs. Patterson said. Brenner's voice replied, steady and cold, "If he walks, the next victim is on your conscience." The audio ended. No one spoke. Not the judge, not the prosecutor, not the detective, not even Daniel Grant. Because sometimes, truth does not need explanation. It only needs to be heard by the people who tried hardest not to hear it. Part 4. The Reveal and Authority Shift. The audio ended, but Detective Brenner's voice seemed to remain inside the wood of the courtroom. "If he walks, the next victim is on your conscience." No one coughed. No one shifted. Even the old fluorescent lights seemed louder now, buzzing over a room that had spent months treating uncertainty like guilt. Isaiah Grant stood at the defense table with his hands at his sides. His face did not show triumph. That confused some people. They expected relief. They expected tears. They expected anger. Maybe they expected him to look grateful that the truth had finally become loud enough. But Isaiah only looked tired. Because the truth had always been true. It had not become more true because a federal badge arrived beside it. Rachel Moore wiped one tear from the corner of her eye and immediately straightened, as if even grief had to be efficient in a courtroom. "Your Honor," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "The defense renews its motion to stay execution of sentence, reopen the record, and hold an immediate evidentiary hearing." Judge Whitaker stared at the blank courtroom screen. For the first time, he did not answer quickly. That silence was different from the silences he had forced on others. This one belonged to him. Elaine Porter, the prosecutor, stood slowly. "Your Honor, the state needs time to authenticate—" Daniel Grant turned his head.
Ms. Porter, the file was authenticated by the Baltimore Police Department's own backup server, time-stamped September 14th, 10:17 p.m., preserved under the original case evidence number BPD-24-9136. Your office received notice of its existence on October 3rd. Porter's mouth tightened. "That is not the same as conceding misconduct." "No," Daniel said. "It is the beginning of explaining why it was not disclosed." The words landed with legal precision. Not loud, not emotional. Worse, documented. Martin Hale clicked the next file. The courtroom display changed to a grainy surveillance video. ENP_library_side_exit_cam_04, September 14th, 2007:42. There was Isaiah. Hood pulled up against the rain, backpack over one shoulder. He pushed open the library side door, turned to say something to Ms. Hall behind him, and stepped into the alley. The timestamp glowed in the corner, 8:07:42 p.m. Rachel turned to the judge. The state argued he left the area before the robbery and circled back.
But the store alarm activates at 8:13:09 p.m. The traffic camera places the masked suspect running eastbound from Bell and Hart at 8:16:31. Isaiah's phone connects to the Saratoga bus shelter tower at 8:18:54, west of that route. Martin opened another image, a traffic camera still. A masked figure in a dark jacket running under a streetlight. The body was broader than Isaiah's. The shoes were white. Isaiah's arrest photo showed black sneakers with a torn left sole. Rachel pointed. "The shoes do not match." No one spoke. Martin opened the phone location log. Device ID I.G.-7712. Subscriber Isaiah M. Grant. 8:18:54 p.m. Saratoga/Pine West Node. 8:20:11 p.m. Police stop. Logged 8:31:09 p.m. Device transported toward Central District. Rachel's voice grew stronger with each fact. No weapon, no stolen property, no forensic match, no reliable identification, no timeline that survives review. Judge Whitaker's eyes remained fixed on the screen. Detective Brenner suddenly stood.
This is being twisted. Footage angles distort size. Phones ping off towers. Witnesses get scared. Daniel looked at him. Detective Brenner, did you state in your report that Mrs. Patterson identified Isaiah Grant without hesitation? Brenner's face reddened. That was my interpretation. Did she use those words? She identified him. Did she use those words? Brenner said nothing. Daniel opened a transcript. Her actual words were, "It could be him, if you think that's the boy." The courtroom seemed to shrink around Brenner. Rachel turned toward the bench. Your Honor, this is not a credibility issue at the edges. The core identification was manufactured. Porter snapped. Objection! Rachel looked at her. You hid evidence that could have saved a child from life in prison. Porter's face flashed with panic. I did not hide anything.
Daniel removed one final page from the folder. Then explain this. He handed it to Martin, who placed it under the document camera.
An email appeared on the courtroom display. From Carl Brenner to Elaine Porter. Subject: R.E. Bell and Hart Traffic Cam. Date: October 5th, 9:42 p.m. The body of the email contained only 3 lines. Traffic cam is messy. Kids not in frame. Could confuse jury. I recommend we leave it out, unless defense gets specific. Porter stared at it. Judge Whitaker stared at it. Rachel's hands went white around the edge of the table. Daniel said, "The defense got specific, repeatedly." Porter sat down. She did not choose to sit. Her knees did. In the second row, Maya Grant began to shake. Naomi pressed against her side, whispering, "Mom, does that mean he's coming home?" Maya did not answer, because hope had become frightening. Hope can hurt when it arrives late. Judge Whitaker finally spoke. "This court was not aware of that communication," Rachel answered immediately. "But this court was aware that defense counsel requested the material. The court was aware there were disputed timestamps. The court was aware the witness statement changed. The court was aware this defendant was 17. The judge's eyes hardened out of habit. "Careful, Ms. Moore." Rachel stepped forward. "No." Everything froze. The word rang louder than the gavel had. Rachel Moore, who had been interrupted, warned, corrected, dismissed, and treated like an inconvenience for months, stood in front of the bench and refused the word that had kept everyone silent. "No, Your Honor. I have been careful. Isaiah has been careful. His mother has been careful. Ms. Hall was careful when she preserved the library log. Even Mrs. Patterson was careful when she said she did not see the face. The only people who were not careful were the people with power." The courtroom clerk looked down at her desk. Then, slowly, she raised her hand. Judge Whitaker turned. "Ms. Ellis?" The clerk, Marjorie Ellis, had worked in courtroom 6B for 11 years. She knew every creak in the floor, every judge's preference, every attorney who filed late, every family who cried quietly after sentencing. She had watched the Grant case move too fast. She had seen Rachel's emergency filing before lunch. She had flagged it. Then she had done what clerks learn to do under difficult judges. She had waited. Now her voice trembled. "Your Honor, I flagged Ms. Moore's emergency motion at 12:04 p.m. I also sent a chambers message at 12:17 that the filing included video references and a request to reopen before sentencing." Judge Whitaker's face tightened. "I did not see such a message." Marjorie swallowed. "No, Your Honor, but Chambers received it." The judge's law clerk, a young man named Owen Bell, stood near the side door. His face had gone pale. Daniel looked at him. "Owen Bell?" Owen hesitated. Judge Whitaker's voice sharpened. "Mr. Bell, you do not need to respond to federal intimidation." Daniel did not raise his voice. "Mr. Bell is not being intimidated. He is being asked whether a filing concerning a child's life sentence was routed to Chambers before sentencing." Owen looked at Rachel, then at Isaiah. That was the moment he had to choose whether his career fear mattered more than the boy in front of him. He spoke quietly. "Yes." The room stopped. Judge Whitaker turned slowly. "What?" Owen's voice shook. "The motion came in. I summarized it. You said Ms. Moore had already made enough last-minute attempts and told me to place it in the routine post-hearing review queue." Rachel covered her mouth. Maya gasped. Isaiah closed his eyes. There it was. Not buried in discovery, not lost in procedure. A choice. Judge Whitaker's face flushed dark red. "That is not an accurate characterization." Owen looked like he might faint, but he did not sit. "It is what happened, Your Honor." The authority in the room shifted so completely that even the deputies felt it. The judge still sat above everyone, but the truth no longer did. Daniel Grant stepped into the center aisle. "Your Honor, given the record now before this courtroom, the Department of Justice will refer this matter for review by the Civil Rights Division, the Office of Professional Responsibility, where applicable, and the appropriate state judicial conduct authority. However, the immediate question belongs to this court." He looked at Isaiah, then back at the judge. "Will you leave a 17-year-old child under a life sentence after hearing evidence that the conviction may rest on withheld material, coerced identification, and a timeline the state cannot defend?" Judge Whitaker's hands moved together. For years, people had mistaken his stiffness for strength. Now it looked like fear trying to hold its shape. He reached for the gavel, then stopped. The courtroom waited. Finally, he said, "The sentence is stayed, pending emergency review." Maya sobbed. Naomi cried into her sleeve. Rachel closed her eyes. But Daniel did not relax. "Custody status?" Judge Whitaker looked at him. "The defendant will remain held pending—" "No," Rachel said. She was ready now. "The defense moves for immediate release under supervised conditions. The state's case has been materially undermined. The defendant is a minor, has no prior felony record, has strong family support, and no credible evidence places him at the scene." Porter stood weakly. "The state—" Daniel turned to her. "The state should be very careful before opposing release based on a record now under misconduct review." Porter sat again. Judge Whitaker looked at the deputy, then at Isaiah, then at the courtroom full of people who had watched him speak the word life, and now watched him try to climb back from it without admitting the fall. "Mr. Grant will be released to his parents under electronic check-in supervision, pending the emergency hearing." The words entered the room slowly. Released. To his parents. Pending review. Isaiah did not move at first. He had heard too many words become cages. Rachel touched his arm. "Isaiah." He looked at her. "You're going home tonight." For the first time all day, his face changed. Not into joy. Into disbelief so deep, it looked like pain. The deputy unlocked the cuffs. The metal clicked open. That sound did what the sentence could not. It broke Maya. She rushed forward until a deputy instinctively stepped between them. Daniel held up one hand. "Let her through." The deputy moved. Maya wrapped her arms around Isaiah like she was afraid the room might change its mind and take him again. Naomi clung to both of them, crying into Isaiah's jacket. Isaiah stood stiff for 1 second. Then he folded. Not to the court, to his family. Daniel watched them, and for the first time, his eyes filled. He had kept the father behind the official for months. Now, the father was winning. But only barely. Detective Brenner tried to slip toward the side aisle. Martin Hale saw him. "Detective Brenner, federal preservation notice applies to your case notes, devices, emails, and all related communications. A formal interview request will follow." Brenner stopped. Thomas Reed, one of the federal agents, stepped between him and the door, not touching him, not arresting him. Not yet. Just making clear that walking away was no longer simple. Judge Whitaker rose abruptly. "This court is in recess." He struck the gavel once. But the sound did not control the room anymore. No one jumped. No one bowed their heads. No one mistook noise for justice. As the judge disappeared into chambers, Marjorie Ellis sat behind the clerk's desk with tears in her eyes. Owen Bell stood near the side wall, pale and shaking, knowing his career might never recover. Rachel walked over to him. He looked afraid she would attack him. She did not. She only said,
You should have said it sooner. Owen nodded, eyes wet. I know. That was not forgiveness. It was a record.
Isaiah pulled away from his mother and looked toward the bench where Judge Whitaker had sat. Then he looked at Daniel. You could have said who you were from the beginning. Daniel's face changed. There was no official answer for that, only the human one. Yes, he said. Isaiah's voice was quiet. Why didn't you? Daniel looked at the evidence folder, then at the empty judge's chair, then at his son's wrists where the cuffs had left red marks. Because I wanted the truth to stand without my title. Isaiah looked at him. And if it hadn't? The question struck harder than any accusation in the room. Daniel did not answer right away, because the honest answer was unbearable. Then he said, Then I would have been too late. Isaiah looked down. The courtroom, still full of witnesses, heard a powerful father admit something power rarely admits. He had misjudged the system, not the evidence, the system. Daniel stepped closer. I am sorry. Isaiah's eyes filled, but his voice remained steady. I don't want to be saved because I'm your son. Daniel nodded. I know. Isaiah looked toward Rachel, Maya, Naomi, Marjorie, Owen, even the benches where strangers now sat ashamed. I want to know how many kids stood here and didn't have anyone like you outside the door. No one answered, because that question was bigger than courtroom 6B, bigger than Detective Brenner, bigger than Judge Whitaker, bigger than Isaiah Grant. Daniel picked up the DOJ folder. Then we find out. And for the first time since the word life had fallen from the bench, the room understood that the case was no longer only about one innocent boy. It was about every file that had been closed too quickly, every objection treated as noise, every witness pushed past doubt, every child told to be careful while adults were careless with their future. Isaiah Grant walked out of courtroom 6B that evening beside his mother, his sister, his public defender, and the father he had refused to use as a shield until the system proved it would not listen without one. Behind them, the judge's bench sat empty. The gavel rested where Whitaker had left it. For once, it looked small. Part 5. The Reckoning, Legacy, and CTA. By 6:14 p.m., courtroom 6B was no longer a sentencing room. It had become a crime scene of procedure. Not because anyone had fired a weapon there, not because anyone had broken furniture, because a child's future had almost been taken in public, with paperwork, legal language, and the calm confidence of people who believed no one powerful would ever read the record closely enough to stop them. Daniel Grant stood near the defense table while federal agents served preservation notices to the clerk's office, the state's attorney's representative, and Baltimore Police Department liaison staff. The notices were not dramatic. They were printed on white paper. They had case numbers, timestamps, document categories, retention instructions, and penalties for destruction. That made them more dangerous. They did not accuse, they preserved. And preservation was the first enemy of a lie. Detective Carl Brenner stood near the side aisle with his hands at his sides, trying not to look like a man surrounded. Agent Thomas Reed had not touched him. He had not raised his voice. He only stood between Brenner and the exit, saying, "Detective, you are free to leave after acknowledging receipt of the preservation notice." Brenner looked at the paper, then at Daniel. "This is political." Daniel's eyes remained steady. "No, this is documented." Brenner's jaw tightened. "You think one bad audio clip tells the whole story?" Rachel Moore answered before Daniel could. "No, but it tells the part you left out." Brenner looked at her with contempt. For months, he had treated Rachel like an overworked public defender, making noise for a guilty kid. Now she stood with the recording he thought had disappeared into a backup server, and the timeline he had tried to keep blurry. That was when Brenner understood something he should have understood the first night. Poor defense does not mean weak truth. It only means the truth has to fight harder to be heard. At 7:02 p.m., Isaiah Grant walked out of the Baltimore City Criminal Courthouse,
through the side exit with his mother on one side and his little sister on the other. No press conference, no celebration, no raised fists. Daniel had ordered the federal vehicles to remain back until Isaiah was safely inside. He did not want his son's first free breath after a life sentence to become an image for cameras. The rain had stopped. The courthouse steps were wet, shining under streetlights. Isaiah paused beneath the stone arch and looked down at his wrists. The cuffs had left red marks in the skin. Maya saw him looking. She took both his hands and kissed them. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Isaiah shook his head. "You didn't do it. I couldn't stop it." He had no answer, because love and powerlessness can exist in the same mother at the same time. Daniel stood a few feet away, watching them, every part of him wanting to pull Isaiah into his arms and every official instinct telling him to wait until the boy chose it. Isaiah finally looked up. "Dad." Daniel stepped forward. Isaiah hugged him so hard Daniel almost lost his breath. For the first time that day, the Attorney General disappeared completely. Only the father remained. "I'm sorry," Daniel whispered into his son's hair. Isaiah's voice was muffled against his shoulder. "You were late." Daniel closed his eyes. "I know." That was not accusation alone. It was truth. And Daniel Grant had built his life on truth, even when it wounded him. 3 days later, an emergency evidentiary hearing was held in a different courtroom before Judge Elena Ramirez, appointed after Judge Whitaker recused himself under pressure from the state judicial administrator. The title on the docket had changed. State of Maryland versus Isaiah Grant Emergency Review Hearing. Case number 24-CR-1187. Courtroom 4A. Presiding, Judge Elena Ramirez. Rachel Moore arrived with 2 banker's boxes of documents, a laptop, and the exhausted clarity of a lawyer who had been dismissed until the record became too loud to ignore. The state sent a replacement prosecutor. Elaine Porter did not appear. Detective Brenner did not sit at the table. He sat behind his attorney. That was a different kind of silence. At 9:30 a.m., Judge Ramirez reviewed the library footage, traffic stills, cell data, and the original witness recording. At 10:12, Ms. Hall from the library testified that Isaiah had clocked out at 8:07 and could not have reached Bell and Hart before the robbery began. At 10:44, Mrs. Alma Patterson testified with trembling hands that she had never been certain and had felt pressured to identify Isaiah. "I told them I didn't see his face," she said. "I said it over and over, but they kept telling me to think about the next victim. I started thinking maybe doubt was dangerous." She turned toward Isaiah. "I am so sorry, baby." Isaiah looked down. He did not smile. He did not forgive her for the room's comfort, but he nodded. That was all he could give. At 11:26 a.m., the replacement prosecutor stood. Given the evidence now before the court, the state cannot maintain confidence in the conviction. Rachel closed her eyes. Maya gripped Daniel's hand. Isaiah stared straight ahead, as if sudden hope might vanish if he moved too quickly. The prosecutor continued. "The state moves to vacate the conviction and dismiss charges without prejudice pending further investigation." Rachel stood immediately. "With respect, Your Honor, the defense objects to any language leaving suspicion over Mr. Grant's head. The state had no forensic evidence, no reliable identification, no weapon, no property, and now no timeline. This child has already been convicted by implication once. He should not be released into another shadow." Judge Ramirez looked at the file, then at Isaiah. "The conviction is vacated. The defendant is released from all conditions in this matter. The court will enter a written finding that the evidence presented materially undermines the factual basis for prosecution." The gavel came down. This time, it sounded different. Not like a door closing, like one opening. Maya broke first, then Naomi, then Rachel, who sat down hard and covered her face with one hand, because public defenders are trained to lose gracefully, but rarely taught what to do when the truth finally wins. Isaiah did not cry until Ms. Hall walked over and handed him the brass compass from his property envelope.
"They gave me your things," she said softly.
He took it. The scratched glass caught the courtroom light. The needle trembled. North still moved, but it had not disappeared. That afternoon, the Department of Justice announced a civil rights investigation into the handling of Isaiah Grant's case and related prosecutions involving Detective Brenner. The statement did not mention Daniel as a father. It mentioned case numbers, discovery failures, witness coercion concerns, juvenile transfer patterns, review of convictions. That was how Isaiah wanted it. Not a story about one powerful man's son. A record of a system being forced to explain itself. Within 2 weeks, Detective Carl Brenner was suspended without pay. A month later, he was indicted by a state grand jury on charges related to falsifying official records, witness tampering, and obstruction. His attorney called it overreach. Brenner called himself a scapegoat. But then, more cases surfaced.
A teenager named Andre Mills, convicted after a witness clarified an identification. A man named Luis Herrera, whose alibi camera footage had been marked irrelevant. A woman named Denise Carter, whose public defender had filed 3 discovery motions before accepting a plea because the missing evidence never arrived. Files reopened, families called, old doubts became new hearings. That was the part no one in courtroom 6B had expected. When truth enters one case, it often knocks on the walls of others. Elaine Porter resigned 6 weeks after Isaiah's conviction was vacated. The official statement said she wanted to spend time with family. The disciplinary complaint said she had failed to disclose evidence favorable to the defense in violation of constitutional obligations. Judge Harold Whitaker faced the State Judicial Conduct Commission. He did not lose his robe in a dramatic courtroom speech. Real consequences rarely look like movies. They look like hearings in gray conference rooms, sworn testimony, exhibits, timelines, emails, and the slow public collapse of a reputation built on certainty. Marjorie Ellis, the clerk, testified. Owen Bell testified. Rachel Moore testified for nearly 4 hours. Then Isaiah testified. He sat before the commission in a navy suit, the brass compass in his pocket, and answered every question calmly. Did Judge Whitaker allow your attorney to argue the emergency motion before sentencing? No. Did you feel the court had already decided who you were before hearing your statement? Isaiah paused. Yes. Why? He looked toward the commissioners. Because he spoke to me like I was part of a category, not a person. That sentence entered the public record. For once, the record held something human. 3 months after his release, Isaiah returned to school. Not everyone knew what to do with him. Some students stared. Some apologized too loudly. Some avoided him because his innocence made their earlier judgment uncomfortable. A teacher named Mrs. Keller stopped him near the hallway and touched his shoulder. "I always knew you were a good kid," she said. Isaiah looked at her hand, then at her face. He was not cruel, but he was no longer willing to comfort people who arrived after danger had passed. "That would have helped more before the verdict," he said. Mrs. Keller's face fell. He walked away, not angrily, honestly. Late belief is not the same as courage. That afternoon, he sat alone in the library where he used to work, staring at the table where he had once helped Marcus pronounce Constitution. Ms. Hall brought him tea in a paper cup. "You don't have to come back right away," she said. "I know. You also don't have to be strong in here." That almost broke him, because everyone kept telling him how strong he was. Strong for standing, strong for surviving, strong for speaking. But nobody asked whether he was tired of strength being the price of being believed. Isaiah turned the brass compass in his hands. "I keep thinking about the kids who didn't have my dad." Ms. Hall sat across from him. "So what are you going to do?" He looked at the shelves, the law books, the children's section, the public computers where people filled out housing forms, job applications, court documents, and appeals they barely understood. "I wanted to be a lawyer," he said. "You still can." "No," Isaiah said quietly. "I need to be more specific now."
1 year later, Isaiah Grant stood on a stage at Howard University School of Law, speaking to an auditorium filled with law students, public defenders, judges, activists, reporters, and families of people whose cases were under review because Courtroom 6B had finally cracked open. The event title appeared behind him:
The Isaiah Grant Justice Initiative. Youth Defense, Evidence Access, and Courtroom Accountability. Rachel Moore sat in the front row. She had since been appointed to a statewide commission on indigent defense reform. Maya sat beside Naomi, holding a tissue before Isaiah even began. Daniel sat at the end of the row, no federal seal behind him, no podium, no title on the program except Daniel Grant, Father. Isaiah stepped to the microphone. The hall quieted. He looked older than 18 now, not because time had passed, because something had been taken from his face and replaced with purpose. When Judge Whitaker said the word life, I thought it meant my life was over, Isaiah began. Not paused, not damaged, over. No one moved. My mother cried. My lawyer froze. My little sister watched adults take her brother away with language she was too young to understand.
And I stood there wondering how a room full of educated people could hear weak evidence and still feel certain enough to bury me. He looked down for a moment, then back up. I was lucky. The word surprised the room. He let it sit. I was lucky because my father had power. I was lucky because my lawyer kept fighting after being ignored. I was lucky because a librarian saved a timestamp. I was lucky because a clerk and a law clerk eventually told the truth. I was lucky because a backup server kept a recording Detective Brenner thought would never matter. His voice tightened. But innocence should not need luck. The applause started, but he lifted one hand. The room quieted again. I do not want my story used to say the system works because I went home. The system did not work. People inside and outside the system forced it to stop failing me. Daniel lowered his eyes. Isaiah saw it. He continued. My father once told me I did not need his name to be respected. He was right about how people should behave. He was wrong about how some rooms actually do. The audience went still. Daniel looked up. Their eyes met. There was no bitterness there, only truth. Isaiah said, We talked about that. He apologized. I forgave him. But forgiveness did not end the work. Maya pressed the tissue to her mouth. Isaiah turned slightly toward Rachel. Public defenders should not have to beg for evidence the state already knows exists. Children should not be tried as adults because fear is easier to sell than facts. Judges should not be allowed to confuse impatience with discipline. And no witness should be pressured until doubt becomes guilt. He paused. Then he said the line that would be quoted for months. Justice should not depend on who you can call after the sentence. The auditorium stood. Not all at once. First one person, then a row, then the whole room. Isaiah did not smile immediately. He looked at the brass compass resting on the podium.
The needle still trembled. But it pointed. After the speech, Daniel found Isaiah outside the auditorium, near a row of young people waiting to shake his hand. Some were students, some were siblings of defendants. Some were teenagers in school uniforms holding notebooks. Daniel waited until the line thinned. You were hard on me in there, he said. Isaiah looked at him. I was honest. Daniel nodded. Yes, you were. For a moment, they stood in the quiet hallway together, father and son. Power and pain. Love and the cost of waiting. Daniel asked, You still want to become a lawyer? Isaiah looked toward the teenagers still waiting near the doors. No. Daniel's face changed slightly. Isaiah smiled for the first time. I want to become the kind of lawyer a kid can call before it's too late. Daniel breathed in, then nodded. That's better. Months later, the Isaiah Grant Justice Initiative opened its first office 2 blocks from the same courthouse where Isaiah had been sentenced. Not in a skyscraper, not behind polished marble. In a modest building with old brick, bright windows, and a front desk where every person was greeted by name. On the wall hung a framed copy of the first reform bill passed after the investigation, the Grant Evidence Access Act. It required early disclosure of surveillance footage, police interview recordings, and digital evidence in juvenile cases transferred to adult court. It established penalties for intentional suppression. It created an emergency review panel for cases involving minors facing sentences longer than 20 years. Rachel Moore helped write it. Daniel supported it. Maya testified for it. Isaiah named it reluctantly, then agreed only after Naomi said, "Let your name open doors for somebody else." So he did. One afternoon, a boy named Marcus came into the office with his mother. The same Marcus from the library. Older now, still carrying pencils like weapons against confusion. He looked around the office and whispered, "You really did all this?" Isaiah smiled. "No, a lot of people did. But it started because of you." Isaiah thought about courtroom 6B, the word life, his mother's cry, Rachel refusing to sit down, his father walking through the doors, the judge's gavel looking small on the empty bench. Then he said, "It started because too many people stayed silent before me." Marcus nodded like he understood more than a child should. That was why the work mattered. Not to make pain beautiful, to make repetition harder. Judge Harold Whitaker retired before formal removal. His public statement expressed regret for procedural failures in the Grant matter. Isaiah read it once and placed it in a folder. Procedural failures. That was what some people called a boy almost losing his life. Detective Brenner's cases continued to unravel. Elaine Porter's license was suspended pending further review. The state created an independent conviction integrity unit. The courthouse added a rule requiring emergency defense filings to be read into the record before sentencing in cases involving minors. Small reforms, real reforms. Not enough, but real. And Isaiah learned that justice is rarely one dramatic door opening. Sometimes it is a door that opens, then paperwork, hearings, arguments, policy drafts, testimony, exhaustion, and another door after that. Still, every door matters if someone is behind it, waiting to breathe. On the anniversary of his release, Isaiah returned to courtroom 6B. It had been repainted. The benches were the same, the fluorescent lights still buzzed. A different judge sat there now, Judge Ramirez. On that morning's docket was a juvenile review hearing for a 16-year-old accused in a case with weak evidence and disputed identification. Isaiah sat behind the public defender, not as a defendant, not as a symbol, as a legal intern with a notebook. The prosecutor began to summarize the case too quickly. Judge Ramirez lifted one hand. "Slow down," she said. "A child's life is not an administrative task." Isaiah looked down at his notebook. His hand trembled once, then steadied. That was the sound of change. Not applause, not cameras. A judge slowing down. A record staying open. A child being treated like a person before the room decided what to call him. And that is what Judge Whitaker never understood when he said life. He thought he was ending a case. He thought he was protecting society. He thought the boy in front of him was just another file from another neighborhood, another young black defendant saying he was only walking home. But Isaiah Grant was not just a file. He was a son, a brother, a student, a future lawyer, a child carrying a brass compass in his backpack because his father had taught him to keep north when the room spins. And when that room finally spun too far, the truth walked through the door, wearing a federal badge. But the badge was not the most powerful thing that entered. The most powerful thing was the question Isaiah asked afterward. What about the kids who have no one like you outside the door? That question became hearings. It became investigations. It became a law. It became an office. It became a public defender staying up late with one more file. It became a clerk speaking sooner. It became a judge slowing down. It became a boy walking into court and leaving with his name intact. So, if this story made you think of someone who was judged before they were heard, write their name in the comments. If you believe truth should not need power to be believed, share this with someone who needs to remember that dignity is carried, not granted. And subscribe for more stories where the overlooked stand tall, the powerful are forced to answer, and justice begins the moment one person refuses to look away. Because one word can steal a life.
But one truth, protected long enough, can give many lives back. And sometimes, the quietest person in the courtroom is not defeated. Sometimes, he is waiting for the door to open. Sometimes, he is standing straight. And sometimes, when the gavel falls too fast, the truth arrives with footsteps no judge can ignore.